Excellent. All right. Thank you all for coming. Welcome back. Those of you that made it that are live on the call. Uh, we are in week 4 still of our coding bootcamp, and we are back again. We had quite a break because Thursday was a holiday. Everybody had a good kind of week between the last time I saw you. But this week we are talking about front end design and development. So I'm going to caveat this with I personally am terrible at front end design, but this isn't a design class. So we're going to talk about principles of design. And then, like we have before, we're going to get hands on with some of the development stuff. So, design is not, we're not going to spend a ton of time designing things. We'll sort of skip through that. We've talked some philosophy about it already. This is going to be more on the mechanics of how we do front end development and make things look nice on the front end. So we're in day 7, front end basics. When we say front end, I know we've kind of defined this already, but this week and next week, we're going to be doing front end this week. Next week is going to be back end. So again, to be really clear on the definition of what those things are, when we say front end, that's going to be anything that users are interacting with. So, your homepage, the about page, all that stuff is considered front end stuff. Usually we're talking about the layouts of the page, the colors of the page, the relative sizes of things, where buttons are, what they look like, look and feel generally is front end. So user interactions or UI, user experience or UX, those are front end type things. And that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We've touched on some of these things already from the design realm. So I want to refresh your memory about this book that I keep plugging. Is one of my favorites. It's in the free coding resources, The Timeless Way of Building, and by Christopher Alexander. Great book talking about how to design buildings and towns that are alive in his terms, as opposed to top down design from academics that make things dead and don't allow people to work the way they would naturally. And that book applies very much to software design. We talked about a little bit of his concepts of having a finite space like a plot of land, and not adding things to the outside of it, but differentiating the space inside, and how it's the same for a website and a web page, software, environments, and all those sorts of things. We're going to talk more about the delineating of space when we talk about front end design today. And so when I say design, again, we're not going to go through the actual effort of designing the app that we're going to make, right? Usually, when you do an application like we're doing kind of along that we're doing here, last week we set up some of the back end basic framework stuff. The design phase would go before most of any of that, right? So you would sit down, literally, like I mentioned, when we do algorithmic problem solving. I mentioned that when you solve an algorithmic problem, the last thing you should do is write code. You should start by just trying to solve the problem and not worry about the code you're going to write. It's the same thing with design. You shouldn't, coding should be the last thing you do. You should be drawing things, maybe even on paper, on a whiteboard or something like that, some other way of laying out what you want to do, so that when you go to develop it, you're just writing down the plan that you've already made. And to that end, there's a part in it's actually a pattern language. It's the second book that Christopher Alexander wrote. It's also free. It's also in the free coding resources. And it kind of dives deeper into what he talks about in The Timeless Way of Building. But one of the things he says in there is that before you lay out the structural details, you have to establish a philosophy which will let the structure that you make grow directly from your plans and the concept of the buildings. And so I want to keep that idea in mind, is that there are philosophies of design that you want to start with. So we're not going to go into the architectural specifics of philosophies. We'll talk more about our software web development design philosophies. And to that end, let's go and get out of here. That's the extent of our slides. You can see how amazing those were. So to the extent of design philosophies, when we look at a screen, right? So this is my web browser. You're seeing my screen right now, and I'm on a web page. I'll talk about what this page is in a second. But think about this page as the plot of land that we have to design. This page is a certain size, and we talk about screen sizes using the words screen resolution. So this chart here says screen resolution stats worldwide. This shows us the usage of different screen resolutions all over the place. And the reason I'm showing you this is one of the philosophies that you have to decide on when you're designing a web application is what screen size you are going to start with when you make your design. And what I mean by that is when I scroll down, I'm going to show you kind of what's on here. We're going to skip this little part here, but if I scroll down Down here, it's going to say screen resolution stats. And underneath it says mobile versus tablet versus desktop. And I absolutely recommend everybody go on here and play around on the site. It's listed in the free resources as well, this GS stat counter thing. What I'm going to show you here is this chart is showing like worldwide usage of different screen sizes. So this is comparing desktop, mobile, and tablet screen sizes. And they're showing the percentage of users worldwide for different things. So the green line up here is mobile users. So you got about 58, little over almost 60%. And this blue line here is desktop users. And this purple one down here is tablet screens. So why do I bring this up? As far as design philosophy goes, you can approach web app design in a number of ways. You could do it either by looking at the largest screen size that people might be using and then designing everything for that and then making changes as screens get smaller, or you could start with a smaller screen size, design for that, and add things as it gets bigger. And the different approaches are mobile first, being that you start with a mobile app, screen size and design for that screen size. Or you can do what's sometimes called graceful degradation, which is a general ability of computers to suspend certain operations so that they don't crash when they get overwhelmed. But in the context of this, when we're talking about design, we're talking about web design, graceful degradation would be using the large screen size to start with, put all the stuff in there that you want to, and then as screen sizes get smaller, the functionality and the things that are on that website degrades, right? So things come off and disappear. So those are two different philosophical approaches to how you design your web page, and the way you execute those are going to be different, right? So the way if you decide to do a small screen first and make it get larger and more things appear on it, or if you start with a large screen and use graceful degradation to take things off of it as the screen gets smaller. So these are sort of concepts and ideas that you should always start with. Set your philosophical basis on what it is you're going to do, where's your point, your starting point, and which screen size you're gonna go with. And I'm going to show you a bit about some tools for how to come up with design inspirations and the tools that you use while you're working with the design and in the development process as well. So I'm going to go over to a couple example websites. I'm going to show you some cool stuff that we can do, also showing screen resolution. So this first website that we're on is just a regular, so this is Meta. I'm sure everyone's heard of Meta. They're the company that owns Facebook, and they are basically the same thing, except they became Meta, so it doesn't really matter. The point here is this is a big tech company's website, and it's all slick looking and does cool stuff. So let's say you're building a website, you're designing one, and what every product designer that I know that does this professionally does this. They go other places and just look at how people do it, and they basically, find inspiration. They're basically just ripping off these designs and just do their own, right? So you take elements that you like in places and you use them for yourself. So, we can look at the layout here and say, all right, there's navigation up here at the top. We hover over these things. There's some navigation elements that disappear when we scroll down. There's videos, all these kinds of stuff. And it's great just to look at this visually and get a sense of where things are. But what's really cool about browsers, and every browser has this, so it doesn't matter what browser you're using, and it doesn't matter what website you're on, you can do this too. And I encourage you to absolutely do this. So if you right click and you scroll down to inspect, and there are hotkeys for this. You could do this in different ways, and depending on what operating system you're on, it'll be different hotkeys. But you can always right click inside the browser and hit inspect. And when you do, it's going to open up this thing on the right-hand side. It's called a developer's console. And it gives you all kinds of cool information. So first thing that it stops on this page right here says elements, and it gives you the actual HTML code for this page. And this should look somewhat familiar from what we did before. We got this whole, doc type HTML first line, then the HTML page itself. And you see, as I'm moving my cursor down on the right-hand side, the left-hand side of the page is highlighting in blue. And what that's doing is each of these elements is being highlighted for us. So this is a great tool. You can see not only where things were, but the code that they wrote to do it, which things they actually used. So this is HTML. We're going to talk more about HTML today and how to set layouts and styles. We barely touched on it last time and sort of ended there. But this is a great way to look at how people are doing it, what they're doing in a very, very technical sense. Below that, on this thing that says styles, this, if you've never seen it before, is CSS, which anybody not returning student know what CSS stands for off the top of their head? No? Steve Scott, anybody?
Cross-site scripting?
No, 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 no. Good guess though. I like that.
Oh,
No, yeah, that's like we need something close to that when we start doing forms and probably try to prevent the cross-site referencing, but no, not cross-site. So this stands for cascading style sheets. And so it means that these are styles and styles exclusively. So you look at this, it says background, you got color, this thing says direction. So, you do a lot of stuff with this.
What was the first word?
Cascading.
Cascading.
Yep,
Okay.
that's the C. Yep. And, that is kind of meaning the top down part is cascading. But the main takeaway is that CSS is for style. So it's going to be the colors, it's going to be the fonts. The HTML is going to be your layouts, where things are, where they are on the page relative to each other. And if you scroll down a little more, so there's some interesting stuff in here. We have this little diagram that shows you margin, border, and padding. And those are things that are like around different elements. So if we click this upper left-hand kind of corner, there's a square, a little arrow in it. And if we click that, then when we hover over these things on the actual page, I'm over on the left-hand side of the page now, you can see that this has got the green bar on the top and there's kind of that blue section in the middle. If I click on that, it'll go to that piece over here on the right, but it'll also show me down here sort of what those different parts are. So there's padding here. There's 80, if you can't see, it says 80 pixels of padding. And you can see what that is on the left-hand side highlighted in green. So that's space above the words and below the words on the top and bottom. And it's just spacing this thing out. But you can't see it normally. Like that's just gap, right? So this is how you achieve those things, the spacing of stuff. You use padding, border, margin, that kind of thing. We're not going to get super deep into playing around with this. This whole that I've just talked about, this is tons of stuff to play with on its own. And so I really recommend out of those resources, as you have time, looking into the free code camp. There are really good front end design and development courses. They have like a course specifically that does this sort of thing and it walks through a lot of playing around with padding and border and margin, the settings you could do, how it works, a little more about in depth about HTML than we're going to touch on here. So I recommend looking at those. But this kind of expose you to the tools you have available to you to check what's there and encourage you to look at these things. So in addition to being able to see all this stuff, you can mess around with this in some really fun ways. So you see how this has, we believe in the future of connecting in the metaverse. I could go over here and edit this to say whatever I want. It'd be like, we don't like you. And it'll say that on the site, and I can see what it looks like there. So this isn't changing. I didn't just hack Meta's website, right? This is just on my own browser. It's on my end. But you saw how easily I did that, right? So this is why you got to be really careful if you see somebody gives you a screenshot that looks totally legit and it says some crazy stuff. You saw how hard that was for me to change. That took no effort, right? It took me no time. High school kids can do that kind of thing. So, yeah.
I assume Meta's got some safeguards to prevent you from uploading this and becoming
100%. It's like, again,
okay.
this is not, I have done nothing to, and like, again, the Meta police aren't going to come and get me or anything for doing this. I didn't hack anybody's stuff or break anything. This is something that you can all do and it harms nothing. It's just in your own browser. So this is insulated from, it's not changing their source code in their servers. It's just like a cool thing that browsers can do. It lets you play around with this.
Okay.
So you can mess around with stuff and kind of see what it looks like. If you're handy with JavaScript or once you start messing with JavaScript, we won't do a ton of it, but we'll do some later this week on Thursday. When you start messing with JavaScript, you could do JavaScript things directly here in the console. So you could do even more stuff with this and you could change the behavior, have alerts pop up and kind of play around with it directly in the browser. And I encourage you all to do it because this is not, again, it's not going to break anything. It's not going to actually get you in trouble ruining Meta's website or anything like that. We're not hacking. This isn't actually hacking. This is just messing around with front end stuff. And it's available in any browser you're in. This isn't just Chrome. I'm in Chrome, but this is every browser does this. Any kind of general questions about that before I move on to some other cool things that are in here for designing front end? All right, so the other piece is really valuable here, and we talked about screen sizes, is when you click this device toolbar, so it's also up in this upper left-hand corner thing, but it's a little, looks like a kind of a computer screen with a mobile screen in front of it, maybe. I think that's what the icon is supposed to be. But when you click on that, it's going to change this left-hand side. So we still have our developer console over here, but I now have a totally different set of controls over here on the left. And so up on the top, it says dimensions. And then it says responsive right now. What that means is that if I grab this bar here and I can drag the screen in and out, and you see that the content inside responds to the change in the size of screen. Right now, if you look up here at the top, this number right here, this is the number of pixels across that we have here. So as I change the pixel size, the font size changes, things line up differently. That's what's called responsiveness. And there's ways to get this done. Again, a lot of this is written directly into HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. It's front end type things. Is this way stuff moves and looks fluid when you move it and change sizes? You can also use this to emulate specific screen sizes on devices. This is exceptionally important. So again, coupled with this desktop versus mobile thing, if you look back on this page that I was showing you, and you say screen resolution stats, you can literally see these are pixel sizes that are on here. So it's 360 by 780. You can set that up here and say, this is the pixel size that you want to do, and look at just that size. Or you could pick an iPhone SE, and this will give you the 375 by 667. This is zoomed out a little bit, but this is roughly what this site would look like on this device, the iPhone SE. And then you could pick other things. Like you could pick, this Galaxy Z Fold 5 or the Nest Hub and see what it looks like on a tablet screen. And this is really, really useful to again, decide if you're doing mobile first design and you want to start doing your layout on something this size. And then you're like, okay, well, we're probably going to move it up to other sizes, but I do want it to be able to smoothly move. So you use responsive. That's how you'll be able to look at these things and change them around and kind of get a sense of it. I do want to warn you, though, when you're doing these mobile device emulators, as this is emulating a mobile device, it's not going to behave like a real mobile device. So it'll give you some sort of misleading information while you're developing. And it's definitely better to hook up to an actual mobile device if you can, even while you're developing. If you're doing it locally, there are ways to set up through your network to look at your actual phone. With what we're doing on Python Anywhere, because it's already live on the internet, and like we did the deployment steps and everything like that last week. So we're going to be developing kind of in an accessible environment on the internet. You'll be able to go to that site while you're developing on your phone. And I recommend you actually do that more than you do look at these. This stuff's helpful, but again, it's going to behave a little bit differently running on an actual mobile operating system. So it just as a kind of a caveat. So any questions about these mechanics or the things that you could do here? This video is really distracting. See if I scroll down, so I'm just not so moving around. Any questions about what we got here, or why you would come here, or how we get here?
Nope, got it.
Got it. Steve, you got something? You're on mute if you got a question.
Hey, Jeff, isn't there some dynamic settings that you can put in there that will work with just about whatever, any device that the people are using?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to show you some of those things to
Okay.
do exactly that. Yeah. And so so like this stuff up here, and that's great. This is a great question. I'm glad you asked. So like this stuff up here, when it says which device, it's just showing you the screen size of that device. So,
Gotcha.
so this is literally just the number of pixels wide and tall that this device is. And
Cool.
so like when I say to run it on an actual mobile device, because again, like the code you write will be the same, but it's going to behave a little differently here in the browser than it will on the actual device. And so like, again, if you're trying to do a smooth scrolling like this does and different things happen and you get it working here and you're like, all right, great, now it's working. If you don't try it on an actual mobile device, it may not scroll as smoothly as it does here. Like when you do the actual thumb scroll on a real mobile device, does that make sense?
Thanks.
Okay, sure.
So would you then go in, if you wanted to use this on not only it's like a desktop and then a mobile device, would you go in and you would tweak the code somehow?
I'll show you a little bit of that. Yeah, how we would do that and like where you do those settings. We're not going to do a ton with making it responsive, but I will show you how you could do that. We'll do that this week. So like some of the stuff we do later today is going to, put into our HTML, and it may actually be in here. So some of these things, typically in the meta tags, has nothing to do with this company name Meta. This is a tag we're going to use as well. You could do, see if they got one in here. Maybe not, but we'll be setting a meta tag that kind of helps initialize your website to the screen size that is being loaded on. And there are ways. Yeah, I'm going to show you some ways to make it. We will make our thing responsive to different screen sizes by default. We're going to use later this week. We'll talk about front end frameworks. We won't spend a ton of time on them, but it's similar to back end frameworks. There are frameworks out there that exist that make all this stuff easy. So we're going to do a little bit of kind of manual manipulation of some of these settings today, show you where you can make those changes, what you could do with them, and how you could play around with them. Then I encourage you guys to all go and play around with them. But then Thursday, we're going to talk about frameworks and JavaScript and show ways that like you could plug and play, grab things like responsiveness and some of the behavior that you want and not have to code it directly yourself. But yes, there are ways that you can set all these things, and we're going to get into exactly that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Steve, you got a question?
Yeah, I didn't see how you got there. I heard you say Meta.
Sure.
Go to Meta.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I'll close this out. So I'm just on the website now. So I just went to Meta, and then any web page you're on, if you just right click and scroll down to inspect,
Okay.
and it'll open up that console thing over there. And this has way more stuff than we talked about. There's so much more going on here that you can do in here. That's just great for front end development type stuff. So another thing I want to talk about before we get into our hands-on stuff for today, sort of a philosophical approach to design, is you have to keep in mind the purpose of your site, the purpose of your web app, and the intended end users, right? So everything we do has to have a purpose, and you don't just design it because you think it's cool or you like it. So this Meta here, this is a tech company. We know that, right? So that's all they do. They do tech stuff. They're largely social media, but they're trying to get into this whole VR thing, but it's technology either way, right? So they have this layout, slick looking, does what it does. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you a couple examples of the different iterations of our website when we design in different ways. So the first one, this is our old website that we no longer have live anymore, but this is kind of one of the original versions that we made. And it was way more like, because we are in some ways a tech company, we have tech components that we're building and we're working on. So we've sort of followed those traditions. We have a lot of things moving around, and there's all kinds of animations, and we got this carousel thing with buttons and all that. And that's all fine and great. And that worked, for a while. It served a purpose to a certain extent. But as we got doing what we were doing, and as we started looking around a little more on, again, taking into account that we are a nonprofit organization and we're trying to get folks like you to come and sign up for what we want to do, we realized that this look is great, and it looks a lot like Meta's page in some ways. Obviously, theirs is much better than I'm going to try to put us on that same pedestal, but it's laid out similarly, right? Like there's no major options here. It's like shop and kind of do some stuff, and we're similar. What we want, though, is something that's clear and easy to sign up on. So the site that you went to, the site that's up now, this is the live site, this is no longer an old version, is much more like other nonprofit organizations. And that's a purpose. There's a reason for that, because this page here is specifically intended to make it easy for people to come here and sign up. The color that we chose for this button versus everything else is made to draw your eye to it, made to show that that's the important part, is heavier, right? There's all kinds of layout things that we did here to make this more serve that purpose, so that people get to the sign up button and do that action quicker and make it clearer to do that, right? So we moved from one design principle kind of to another based on the purpose of what we were trying to accomplish.
Jeff, you said that this is your final product, which is kind of a bold statement, and as we all know, that everything changes.
Yeah.
But you have beta on there, so
right?
Why do you have beta if you see this as your final product?
That is a great question, man. I love that you asked that. So beta, in the sense of our entire program and what we are doing as an organization, is beta. So like what you are doing right now is technically a beta trial. Like we don't have this full on as a, fully baked thing. We're a young organization, so we want to give that feeling that we are sort of in a beta phase, because we are. A lot of things that we're making are beta phases. So when I say that this is like the final product, that is to say that this layout serves the purpose of where we are now, because where we are now as an organization is trying to get more people to sign up and do what we do and partake as participants, right? So as you look at this, there's nothing in here asking for donations. There's nothing in here focusing, because that's not what we wrote this for. We didn't write this for donors. When we are focused on doing that, we'll probably make some changes to this. So to your point, it's like, it's never finished in the sense of being done and static. It's been designed for a specific purpose that we are in as an organization now. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thanks.
Cool. So similar to what we did before, I mean, you can see the same, you could go here and look at the layout of these and see the design decisions that we made. And it's going to be much, much simpler to follow a page like mine than Meta's, because I don't have a whole team of front-end developers that are amazing at what they do and do some crazy things. Much smaller group of folks doing much simpler things. But similarly, you can look at these layouts and see what they are. And again, we can see that we have, if I switch this back to our responsive layout and kind of go through these checkpoints. So we designed this for mobile first. right? So we started with the smallest screen, and this is the layout that we started with. So everything stacks up this way, and we started with this layout of being top to bottom. You know, this is the first thing you see, and then there's kind of some more stuff as you scroll down, follow standards of navigation at the top and things like that. But as we make the screen larger, you can see that the things spread out a little bit. But then once we get to right about here, see that everything moves and jumps up to a different layout. And you can see the stuff on the right changes as well. So that concept is called a breakpoint. And it's a very specific number that you set in your code of pixels up here that once we go past that certain breakpoint, the behavior changes. So when it's right around 760 something, you see that it jumps. We're up here in 771 and 768 is where it jumps. So like specifically that pixel number is where this happens. And so that's what you do, is that in your CSS, you set what's called a breakpoint. And as I said right here, there's 768. Here's our 768 over on the side, where you say at media, and this is kind of the mechanics of it. We're not going to dive real deep into CSS, but this is how you do these sorts of things. So you write in your code that once the media, which is this page, is this width of 678 pixels, then do certain things. A 2-column grid, as you can see right here, there's 2 columns with that purple part in the middle. And so this is the code that we write to make that happen on the page. And as you can see, when I move it over, that element over here on the right kind of disappears, because we went past that break. We changed that breakpoint. And it pops up again when I go past that breakpoint. We following that? Cool.
Yep. Okay.
All right. So again, there's tons of stuff to do around this on like how to design these sites, the best way to do it, what you could do with this in the browser. And there's literally entire courses on that. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on designing our thing and whatnot. We're just going to kind of dive into the mechanics of where you set these things up, so you know where these things are and how to do them. And then I want to set you loose on playing with these settings, adjusting color, sizes, layouts, and all that kind of stuff. So any questions on this before we move on? Any questions on what we've covered so far? No? Straightforward.
What browser are you using?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Which browser are you using?
I'm using Chrome.
Thanks.
Yeah. But again, this should be done in possible in any browser. It shouldn't matter what browser you're using. But they will actually, and that's kind of an interesting thing too, because I read this really interesting thing about, if you go back here, it shows which browsers are more common. Browser version market share. Let's have a look at this. I'm willing to bet Chrome is like by far the most used, because that's what it has been for the longest. Yeah, so this is Chrome for Android, which is huge. And then Safari for iPhone is the second, right? So Chrome up here looks like things have been kind of changing. Chrome's dropped a little bit. But this also is interesting to find out. Like, again, when you're doing web development specifically, different browsers will behave really differently. And I read this interesting article a few years ago about how, since everybody uses Chrome so much, it's sort of made developers get sort of lazy and focus on Chrome and then not make it for other browsers and stuff like that. So they focus on Chrome functionality, and there's like a whole ecosystem of things that don't work on other browsers. But, we're not going to get deep into that on how you do make things functional for different browsers. But I think this page had an example of how to do that. The kinds of ways you do that is generally in your HTML meta tags up in here. I think they might have had one. Oh, here's that width I was going to tell you about. We're going to use this right here actually to set our width initially. But yeah, so it's these sorts of things that'll say like, hey, work with different browsers, and there are things that you can add into your HTML that'll make sure it doesn't break if you use Internet Explorer and things like that. And consciously remembering that other people might use different browsers is something that developers should do, right? So you shouldn't just, if you're using a Chrome and you're testing on Chrome, like, again, if you go down the route of web development, you're going to end up doing tests in a bunch of different browsers, and you should, because it's going to behave just a little bit differently. You might have to put in some bits and pieces that say like, hey, do this for, make sure that it can run on Firefox. There's not a lot you got to do, but sometimes there's some things you need to do.
Yeah, the reason I ask, and not to go down a rabbit hole, but it looks different than I use DuckDuckGo.
Okay. Yeah.
So it looks different. The coding's a little different.
Yeah. It'll be again, the layout will be slightly different, and there's like different hotkeys on how to get to this in different browsers, but they all should have this sort of thing in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question though. And again, that's also, I mean, seriously, like, things will work a little bit differently depending on what browser you're using. So, be aware of that, but it all should generally function the same. All right, cool. So if no other questions, it's actually fun. We're going to actually use this exact thing here in a second, but I'm gonna leave that alone. Let's jump over to our Python Anywhere and start getting hands-on with setting up our own page to do some front-end stuff like we were showing there. So I'm already in my console. We're gonna get started in consoles. So if you're following along live, then go ahead and get to a bash console and let's get started. Because while you're doing that, I could do just like a quick kind of recap of where we are now, where the website should be for those of you that have followed along up to this point. I'm just going to open it in a new tab. So we set this up to be very, very basic last time, and we routed through our to-do app, which we aren't doing much with the app itself yet, except using the views.py inside to serve up our pages, right? So we in class made an index at our root directory, our root URL, which is just your username.pythonanywhere.com. So it's a base URL that you have. And if you followed the documentation and took the steps that I asked you to do after class last time that we didn't do in class together, I asked you to route also an about page. So if you did that, you should have both the index and then an about page that are largely the same, except that the URL for about is /about to get there. So, you follow the same patterns of making a view, which here, I'll actually go back through those steps again to highlight them because we're going to keep doing them over and over again. And I want to make sure we're absolutely, absolutely clear on what those steps are. So again, in our to-do app, and we go down to views.py. So we made our views. So these are our two views. Again, they're pretty much exactly the same. This is one for about that we didn't do in class, but it's the same pattern as the index. If you haven't done it before, you should be able to quickly just copy your index and paste it over real quick, fairly simple. So we define this function. We're using functional views. We define a function that takes in the request, which again, the browser sends the request to a server. So the client sends a request over HTTP. And then we render back to them a template of some sort, routing it through, back in our to-dos, our urls.py. So this again, it's a refresher. This is what we did last time. We route these named URLs and we load one of our templates that we made. And we remember last time we made a couple of different templates. We have our base HTML. We have our index, and our base is where we're going to spend a lot of our time today. This is where we have most of our HTML. Again, here's the doc type thing and our beginning tag and all that sort of stuff. All right, so before we get really going today, I'm going to do the first couple of steps that we always do. We are going to go back to that base.html, do most of our writing. But before we get going, sort of as practice for the beginning steps of any time you get going, we're in our root directory now. So we're in our home directory, not our project root, our home directory. And I want to activate my virtual environment. So if you, for whatever reason, still have yours activated, that's totally fine. But I'm starting from kind of a fresh point to make sure that we remember these steps. Don't forget to activate your source or your virtual environment. Do source space, name of your virtual environment, bin, activate. Remember to use tab complete, make sure you're in the right place. And then we're going to go to our root directory, which should be my site. That's right. So now we're in our working directory. We're not going to do a ton of this right now. Let's see if I have... Let's just get our tree command in here and kind of show the layout of our file structure on where we have it from where we ended. We just kind of looked at it, but I want to print it out here again just to make sure. So we got CSS that we want to skip. We want to skip our images, and we want to skip any JavaScript stuff. Cool. So here's our, might have to zoom out a little bit to make that fit, but here's our directory layout for our home. So we got our my site and we have our static main. Remember last time we collected static and we collected the admin files from some other place and they were compiled here into our static main. What we're going to do today when we do front end stuff is more static file management. Static files typically hold our CSS stuff and our JavaScript things. So we're going to set up some other static file directories, move some files into there and collect static again to stack them up here in the top part. We'll go over what that functionality is again, make sure everybody really understands what's happening when we do collect static. But this is what the file structure should look like now, right? So you have our manage.py, our my site directory, We have our static main directory that we set last time, the templates where we have our about, base, and index, and then our to-do app, which again houses our models, our views, I'm sorry, and our URLs. All right, so that's catching us up where we are. And let's go over to our base.html and start doing some of this code. So the first thing, we mentioned this, I mentioned already when we talk about the size of screens, and I showed even the tag that we're going to use here. What we want to do, there's a lot of things that as we showed on that Meta website, there are a lot of things you could put into the head element of your HTML things. You saw there were a ton of different tags in there, so we're not going to go through all those things. But a lot of those things end up being sort of standard, we call boilerplate. You can find good boilerplate HTML out there that's going to have all this stuff in there. But one thing is really common to get started, and you saw that was in that Meta site, is a meta tag. So meta, put this in. So you got a question? Nope. Okay. So we put this meta tag in, and what we're gonna do with this tag is give it some attributes inside of it that will allow this to set our web app to the screen size of the browser through which it was accessed initially, right? So we're going to do that as what's called name, and we're going to give it viewport, all one word. And I want to remind everybody that in HTML, you have to use double quotation marks. We had the option in Python, but that will break things in HTML. So use double quotation marks for all these attribute settings. So we do name, we set the name attribute to viewport. And then we're going to give content, say equals or is, right? Double quotation marks to open it up. Move some of the Zoom stuff out of the way. Yep. And then we're going to give it some more internal settings that we want to set the width to a specific device width. Again, so this is going to give it the ability to grab whatever device it's on, and it's going to get the width of that screen. And then we set the initial dash scale to 1, meaning it fit that same scale. So make it that size. And this right here is just one example of a meta tag, something that's very standard to use. And what this is going to do is set our page to the initial size of whatever browser grabs it. So this is kind of one of the first steps in making something responsive and fit the web page that we want it to. All right, cool. So we have that. Now that's going to, nothing real beautiful to look at, but this is something, again, to remind you that these settings typically on the size of the page and all those sorts of things, and what we talked about before with the screen resolutions, you're going to be setting those things here in either HTML or your CSS. And this is a very, very, very common way to start. So the other thing that we want to do a lot in front end design development UX things is we want to make sure that we have ways for users to move around within our website. So again, think about the analogy of a plot of land, and we have an office building in it. There's an entryway, a lobby. That's like our homepage, but we want people to be able to move to this about page, right? Find out more information about us. And right now, we can go up here and manually go between pages by adjusting the URL ourselves, but that's terrible. We don't want to do that, right? So we want to be able to have buttons like every other web page in the world that we can navigate between these two pages. So let's set that up. So this is the first thing we're going to do is set up our navigation. Now, again, we're going back to our base.html because we want this navigation to be on every page that we use, right? So we want this to be on our index, our about page. This is going to be the navigation bar that you usually find at the top of most web pages. Again, this is a very typical design pattern that we're going to do. For this, we're going to go down to the body. We're going to put this in the body. And we're going to use an element that's just called nav, N-A-V. So we do NAV, and on the inside of this, we're going to use a very common tag called an A tag. And this is how we set up our links between pages. We can link to anything in this. So the typical attributes that we put into an A tag are a class. We use class very often. This is not the same as a Python class. We'll talk a lot more about what classes do in this sense, but it's a very common thing to use. So we're going to put a button class to make this look, let them know there's a button. But then the thing that it really needs is called an href. So this is a hyperlink reference. And so this is telling what address to go to. And this could quite literally be any URL address you want to. So you could put in, Google. It doesn't matter. You do HTTPS, www.google.com, just as you would in the top of your browser. And this will put a link on your page to go to that page, right? That's totally cool, but we're going to use this for internal navigation between our own pages. So we're going to leverage our backend framework of Django to use this URL to reference a page that we create. In our case, we're going to make this link to our home page. So again, imagine this is our template. This is going to be at the top nav bar on every page. We want a way to get back to our home page. So the way we're going to do that is inside these double quotations where I wrote the Google address, we're going to use Django's template language again, have the open curly braces, the percentage sign. And I'm going to close this off so I don't forget to. It's my percentage sign and curly bracket. And then we're going to give this reserved word URL, all lowercase, no other markings. And then we're going to pass it the name of the URL we want to send it to, right? And we're going to send that as a string. And since we're inside of the HTML double quotations, we're going to use single quotations. We can use these for the Django and Python type stuff. And we'll tell it where to go, right? So I'm going to put index in here. What is this referencing? Can somebody tell me exactly what I'm referencing when I put in index? Like, where is this going when I put this here? What's that?
The homepage?
Yep. A little bit more specifically though, where is this? What is this calling out of the code that we've written? So general routing, we start in views and we have URLs, and then we have our template. So like, what is this pointing to exactly in the back end?
The index.html file. Is that correct?
Close.
Or URLs.
Close. Yep. It's pointing to URLs. So right here, the name that we set, this is what we're referencing when we do this, right? So this URL tag is going to tell Django, like, all right, cool. You're going to look for a URL in your URL patterns, which is going to be in one of your URL files that we set up, that's named this, that has a name of index. And then you're going to do what this tells it to do, right? So that's what this is setting to right here, is the index that you set in your URLs.py, which, as we know, references back to our views.
You're addressing the file named index, right?
It's not exactly, right? So the file is referenced here. I'll show you. The index.html file is actually referenced in views. So if you remember, your view is where it tells you which template to use. Your URL is named index as well, right? So we could change the name of this, and then we'd have to change here with the name, but the views name could stay exactly how it is, because this right here is just the name of the template. Or we could change the name of the template and leave these as index, and it would still work the same way. So this is referencing what you have in your URLs, and then this is referencing what's in views, and views is referencing what your template is. Everybody tracking on that flow?
Yeah, kind of.
I don't expect you to grab it the first time. I get it. This is definitely like the second time we talked about it. We're going to keep talking about it. It's the same pattern on every bit of functionality we build on this. So it's feeling a little slippery now. It's all right, but anyone totally lost?
No, just slightly misplaced.
Slightly misplaced. All right, great. That's good. Okay. As long as I'm not, the first lieutenant walking you off in the wrong direction or anything, then I think we're okay. All right. So once we got our href, as we call it, so our hyperlink reference written in there, and we've closed everything off, we need to wrap this up with the rest of our tags, the rest of our a tag. So I want to put in our little greater than sign. It closed off the tag with this \a. This is the closing tag. The space in between here is what is actually going to show up on the page. So I do this all the time. I will forget to write text in here. I'll go to test my site and there's no link there. And I'm like, what did I do wrong? You got to write something in here or else you won't see anything on your page. So we want this to tell us that this link goes home. So we'll just write the word home in there. And then what I'm going to do is, since we're doing the general navigation, I'm just going to copy this whole thing. Sorry, y'all got Zoom stuff all on my way again. So I'm going to copy this whole thing, and I'm going to do another a tag. So it's just going to be another link, but for our about page. So it's going to be exactly the same stuff, except I just got to change the URL to point to about, to our URLs page again. So the name for about here, and then what's written on the actual link so we can see it.
Well, that's just a copy of the line above with about instead of.
Exactly. So it's exactly the same thing. And so this pattern again is going to be over and over and over again when you make an a tag, when you do, so like when we start making our back end operations, the create, read, update, and delete next week, we're going to do the same patterns where we make the view, we write the view, map the URL, create any templates that we need to. And then in here, we need to route some sort of navigation to it. So we're going to be doing this A tag pattern kind of going forward. You know, this is a really common pattern. All right, so I'm going to save this. And then I can hit this little kind of recycle looking symbol up here, reload our source code on the browser, or I'm sorry, on the server side. And then once that's done, we'll hop over and refresh our browser. And if we didn't destroy anything, which it looks like we didn't, we should have two buttons pop up, say home and about. And it still looks like a 1990s web page, but we should be able to now navigate between these two things by clicking on these. So click on about, and now we're at the about page. We see the URL change at the top. We'll click on home to get us back. So now we have some basic navigation between our two pages if you made both pages. And that is going to be the same pattern, again, played out. We're going to do it over and over again for how you do A tags. And again, these things can link to whatever you want to. It doesn't have to link to your own pages. Questions?
Go through the step again, how you got from the base HTML file back to the website with one easy click.
From here?
Yeah.
Oh, I just had this open in another tab. So you could just open your web tab like you normally would anywhere else or something.
Oh, okay. Just another window, right?
Yeah. I just opened the website in another tab. So just go to your website the way you normally do. I just had this open already.
Okay.
And typically when I'm like developing, just, you know, as a note, like I generally have one side open next to me and the code I'm writing on the other side, next, like split screen that way, but I'm doing it just on one screen. So it's easier for everybody to see. And I can make it bigger and stuff like that. But yeah, I keep these tabs open so I can flip between them. Scott, you got a question?
Is homepage always index?
No, that's a good question.
Why do you call home index and not home?
Yeah, not home. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, you could call it home. That's absolutely totally fine. It's kind of like an old school internet standard. Just a lot of projects will use index as the root page of it. And when you make other applications and other parts of your website, each of those sections may have their own index. Like you may use index several times and it may not all be your home page, right? So you may have one home and several indexes, right? So it's kind of like a fairly standard way of referring to the root landing page of some sort of project.
Seems could be confusing.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, we could just call it home, but
Or just because we're not used to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like I'm exposing you to that
Oh.
term because it's something that's really commonly used, but it doesn't have to be, right? It's not, it's
Gotcha.
kind of a convention. And it is more, again, to let you know that you'll run into that places. It's very common, but I don't know, honestly, the root of why they started calling it that. I know it's just like kind of an old way of doing it, but yeah, you could absolutely just make it home, say this is home or something like that. Good questions. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Cool. So let's get into some other stuff. So we talked about what front end development is, and HTML is generally layouts and things like that. But you see this also some movement that we can do that's front end type stuff. That's, you know, in the UX, UI, user experience or user interface, where buttons are, the movement between pages. So the routing of pages is more kind of back end, but this, you know, where buttons go and how you move between them, that's going to be more your front end stuff. The other front end sort of things that we do a lot, or the other thing is considered front end, is just the general styles, colors, fonts, those sorts of things. There are a number of ways that we can do this. I already mentioned CSS, but you can set styles directly in HTML. We're going to start with that, and then we'll step into pulling it out into CSS and why that even exists and why that's a thing. So first, let's show some examples of how we can set different styles just directly here in HTML. So one way to do that is that we can go using our attributes in tags. So we've got this body tag here on my row 8. I'm gonna go inside the tag right next to the word body, between that and the little greater than sign, give myself a little bit of space. And we're gonna use an attribute to set the background color. And it's just called BG color, short for background color. And we're gonna set it to a value. Now there's all kinds of different ways to set values for this. We can just write a word. You can write the word blue and save it. I'm going to reload my my server. And what this should do is set the entire body tags, like the whole page, should be set to blue whenever it loads. Let's go to my site. Let's see what it is. So it's white now. And there it is. Now it's blue. So we made the whole page blue. You may not want to do this color, but that's really the mechanics of it. It's pretty much that simple. You can just write directly into the tag, this background color, make it blue, set it to wherever you like. There are lots of other ways to set colors. You can use what's called hex values in the free resources. There are CSS and HTML cheat sheets that have really good ways to like do a color picker, and it'll give you the values that you want to use to use in here. Let's go ahead and look at that, because I want to show how you grab those things and what they look like. Because again, this is going to be very useful for everybody as you do your own design development and all those sorts of things. So when you do references and documentation, there should be this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript cheat sheet. And I'm gonna open this bad boy up. All right, cool. So this has tons of cool stuff to play around with. And it's got tags, it's got ways to edit things. What I'm gonna look at right here in the middle is color picker, right? So you have all these little squares and whatnot that you can click on and do different stuff. When I click on this, it's gonna open another tab. Yeah. Privacy, sell my information. I know that's what you're doing. All right, so then we have this big color picker here. And what we do is, like, let's say we want to pick a color. Doesn't really matter what. Let's pick this kind of nasty green looking color. When I click on one of these things or hover over it, it's going to give me all these values down here in the bottom, right? So there's this pound sign and then 00FF55. This is what's called a hexadecimal values. It's a hex value. And this is just one way of expressing this color, right? So if we picked another color, as I hover over these, you can see that there's a hash and then some other thing. And then there's also RGB, which stands for red, green, blue. And then you got, hue, saturation, and value. There's all kinds of ways of expressing this same color. So all these ways of writing it. There probably are some differences in here. We're not going to get that deep on why you would use one over another. I tend to use these hash ones, but you can use red, green, blue if you want to, and put these values in there. I'm going to use this for now, just to do this for now and show you how to do it and how to set it. You could use any one of these different things to set it, but we're going to use hash values for ours, right? And this is, again, making it a little more complex if you want to do more than just basic colors like blue and green and red and stuff like that. If you want to get really into the adjustments, the saturation, the hue, the value, the fine tuning of the colors, this is more flexible on how you're going to do it. So that's why you would want to use these things over the solid words. But the choice you make in between these, again, is how much control you want over these things and how you want to express these. But again, this is like 5 ways of writing the same stuff, right? So I'm going to take this hex value and copy it. So I got 00FF55 and go back to my base.html. And where I have the word blue, I'm just going to put that value in here with the hex, with the hash mark, and then that value. I'm going to save this. And when I reload the server, the code on the server, on the server side, go back to
Save it.
what's that?
It's
Yep.
saved.
Yep. Saved it. It would tell
Okay.
me up here if I said unsaved changes, if I hadn't. It would say right next to here that I didn't. So I saved it. I reloaded it on the server. And when I come over here, it should go from blue to that kind of disgusting color that we picked as the example. Whatever this is, malachite, I guess, is the name of that color. But so that's how you can set colors. You could do all sorts of things with styles in here, not just colors. You could do fonts. You can do tons of different stuff. This is a great place to get some inspiration on how that works and see specific attributes you could put in there. This, again, has some beginning structure. So use these things as HTML. There's CSS once we get into it. That's going to have some more information on how you use all these things. Great resource. I say go for it. But again, this is mechanically how you do it. So you give it what attribute you want to set on the element that you want to set it, and then you set the value of that element. Any questions about that in principle on how that works?
Okay, you also have things like you can set the font color of the print on it and that stuff.
Yep. You can set the font color, you can set the font type, you can set all kinds of, just pretty much anything you want to, really.
Okay.
And this is one way of doing it. So you do this what's called inline styling. This is because it's in this line. So you just do like another, attribute here and do whatever you like and set it to, again, text size, text color, whatever it might be that you want to do. This, again, inline styling. So there's one way of doing it. All right. So now let's talk about how we would use CSS, because this is still just all HTML. We haven't done any CSS yet. I've pointed it out in the example when we're looking at front end stuff, but let's go and write something. Let's use it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do basically a refactoring, right? And then we'll play around with it and kind of do some more stuff with it, but we'll start by just refactoring. So first I'm gonna go back up into our head tag, right? So I moved out of the body tag, I'm in the head tag. I'm gonna put some space below our title, right? The element that says my site, that's kind of this thing up here at the top. And I'm going to add a style tag. The style tag is going to contain, and it's going to expect CSS. It's going to expect us to write directly in CSS. So we're not going to write in Java or HTML anymore. We're going to write in CSS syntax. It's going to be a little bit different syntax, but it's not very hard. There's not a lot to it. It's very, very simple. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to name, we're going to show, okay, take a step back. There are lots of ways to indicate what you want to set the style of. So you could take the name of a tag itself and set all tags with that name to have certain styles, or you can use classes like we did here with the button, and you can use IDs, and we'll go through those uses soon, but I'm going to start by changing an entire tag and show you how that's done. So there's kind of three main ways that you set styles in CSS, or you call a tag by its name, or you use a class or an ID. We'll do classes and IDs in a second, but let's start by calling tag by its name, set this style, and move this call from here up into our CSS. All right, so we're in our style tag. We're going to type the name of the tag we want to type. So body, that's what we want to grab. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to set the color of our body, but we're going to do it in CSS. So we say body. Since we're doing it in Python Anywhere's text editor, it's highlighted in red because it's showing us the CSS syntax help. And then we're going to open a curly bracket. I'm just going to go ahead and close it because it's going to be between curly brackets. And this is where we're going to set our styles, our attributes, what we want to do. All right. So we're still going to set the background color, and we're going to set it to this same amazing green color. But we don't want to use the same tag because this is the HTML way of doing it. So in CSS, we're going to specify a different thing. It's just background dash color. And there's going to be a key value pair separated by a colon. So we do the name of the thing we want to change. In this case, again, you have to look up in CSS what it's called. So use those reference sheets to see what it is you want to change. In our case, we want to change the background color. This is what it's called. And when we hit colon, it gave us a semicolon too. So that's the last part of this line. Got to remember to put it in there. It's important in CSS. And we put our value in between those, in between the colon and the semicolon. So I'm just going to take this hash, this hex value that we did, and I'm just going to cut and paste, put it up here. And there we go. So now we have our background color. I'm going to remove this attribute from our body tag. And so what this CSS right here is telling us, and this is just regular, this is what CSS looks like, right? So it's telling us that our body tag, we want to set the background color to this color, right? So when I save it and reload it, this should, since it's refactoring, shouldn't change anything. So hopefully we come back here and I refresh.
You need to take background color HTML out of like line 15, right?
I did. I took it off the body tag.
Well,
Yeah,
that's,
so you
I mean,
gotta-
if you put them both in there, then you would have a problem, right?
Probably, yeah. You definitely don't want to reference because then it's going to be a conflict on which one's doing what, and you may not know, and it could load one later. It could override things, could come up with
Yeah.
unintended behavior. So yeah, try to call these in one place.
Supposed
Or
to pick
set
the
them.
most specific thing, and the inline tag should be the most specific, but the question is the browser going to interpret it the way you believe it is?
Exactly. And that could be, you could find to your dismay that it's certain browsers do it differently and treat it differently, right? So yeah, being organized about this is really important. And so again, we did this and we've moved it up here. And you might be wondering, okay, great, why did we do that? The idea with this is that now we could put any number of other attributes in here that we want to, and we just keep adding to this, and this body tag doesn't change. It's just sitting here chilling. So we mess with all of our styles right here. And again, this is just another way of allowing us to expand and make a more complex project, have much more styles, more thorough things in here without cluttering it up in here. If we added 2 or 3 more attributes to this tag, it would already be too much. But if we added like 5 or 6 up here in CSS, that's not going to be a problem. It's going to be just a list that's all clean in here. So this is generally why we would do this. Another reason we would do this is because CSS allows us to do what we call with these classes and IDs. So let's show how those work. Excuse me. All right. So first, let's start with classes because classes are really common. And the reason that you would want to use a class versus an ID is kind of an example down here, right? So we have two buttons, two different elements, but they're both sharing the same class, right? Because a class is something that you're going to use over and over again. You might use it on multiple different elements within your design, whereas an ID is going to be a specific one thing. So it just is a little less frequent that you use IDs, but you may have reasons to. So I'm going to go through the mechanics of both, but we'll start with classes. So right here, we have our just straight body tag that we called. Sometimes you'll want to do this, but more often than not, you're going to want to use a class instead of calling a specific body or a specific named tag in HTML and setting all those tags to that. So the way we do that is we are going to set a variable name. It could be any name we want to, but to indicate that it's a class in CSS, we start with a period. So classes start with a period. So it's dot and then the name that you like, whatever we want to do. So I'm going to call this one green background, give it something descriptive. But again, you call this whatever you like. This is a variable name right here. This green background. The only important part is that it starts with a period to tell CSS that it's a class. Cool. So we've done that, but now we got to give this class attribute to the button or the whatever it is we want to have this, right? So let's do.
So the body
Mhm.
body command disappeared from line 9 or something, right?
Yep, I took it out. So I took out instead of the word body that was here, that was saying which tag to apply this style to. I'm now saying apply it to this class.
Okay.
So it's the same style that we were using, but I'm not putting it straight to the body tag anymore. I'm putting it to a class called green background.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
And now I'm applying that class to my body tag, right? And the idea being it should function exactly the same way. Let's reload this. And again, this is refactoring. So I'm gonna apply it to something else and see if we can make it look a little bit different. But I want to show that we didn't break anything by doing it this way. And there we go. So our site didn't break. We're still able to navigate, and we saw this disgusting green color, which is good. That's what we wanted to do. Right. So
Oh,
the idea here.
is the dot green background just like a label or a?
Yep. This
Okay.
is a you could call this whatever you like. This is just a variable name. The only important part is the dot. The dot tells us it's a class.
Okay.
So now we have this green background class. I mean, we could put it, let's try putting it on one of these A tags and see if it does something differently. So I'm going to take it out of here and drop it down in here. So classes could be stacked up within, like you put multiple classes into an attribute. Like, so class, this has button, and now I've just added our green background to the first one. Let's see how this is different. Let's see what changes when I do that. So I took it out of the body tag entirely. Reload this on my browser. And then what I expect this to do is highlight the A tag in green when I get back over there. We'll see how much it does. I'm not sure how big that's going to make it, but we'll give it a shot. So now I've applied the class to just our first button. Let's see if that does anything. So there we go. So now it's taken it off of the background and it's just highlighted this little one thing in green up here. So again, any class that we, or anything that we assign this to, we'll get that same class. So we could add it to the about button if we wanted to. We wanted both buttons to have that green background instead of the whole page. We could do
You
that.
don't need the dot in this case, right?
Nope. Good catch. When you call it, you do not use the dot. You only use the dot in the definition of the CSS. Very good call. So when you actually label one of your tags with this value, you don't. And so now you can see I've used it in both A tags, and it can be just those things that have that color. And it's just defined once, but I use it multiple times. So that's how classes work. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. Any questions about classes? All right.
Just have it.
Nice. Now I'm going to show you an example of an ID and how you write an ID, even though it's less frequent that you use them, but it is something that's good to know how to use them. Very similar to classes, except they start with the hashtag, pound symbol, whatever we want to call this. So I'm going to call this blue background. Again, this is any variable name. The only important part is that it's with a hashtag in the front. It opens up this tells CSS that this is in ID. Right? So we got blue background, and then I'll do the same thing except we'll make it blue. So I'll do background dash color, and then I'm just gonna, again, using the same examples we did before, I'm just gonna use the word blue. Cool. So now I've got a background color ID. And the way we would do that is, the way we would use it is we're just going to say the actual ID and just put that value in here. And so if we want to use this one, just like we did with our class name, we don't use the hashtag in the name. We just do blue background. So this should, now that we have our class here, the green background, and we have set our ID with the blue one, this should just put this button, make it blue, and this one should still be green, hopefully, if we've done things properly and if things work the way we expect them to. And there we go. So we turned our home
there you
button blue and our about button's green. And
Okay,
all
so
of it's,
can we go back to the step where you wrote in blue background at the top
Nope.
there?
that's it. Yeah, sure. So
Okay.
all we do is up in the style tag in the same way that we define the class. It's exactly the same thing, except you just open it up with a hashtag.
Oh, it's just another one of these, right?
It's the
Basically.
same syntax except for the hashtag. The hashtag is what indicates an ID. It's still curly brackets. It's still this key value kind of construction with the semicolon at the end. The only difference is the hashtag. And there's, again, the idea here is that you're just going to assign that to one thing. You're not going to use it several times. You want to use a class if you want to use it several times.
Let me see that. Let me see the blue background there.
This one up here or the one down below?
That one right there. Just
Mhm.
background.
I think the technical term on that is octothorpe.
Yeah.
Octothorpe. I like it.
Yeah, nice.
I'll pass that around in casual conversation.
Absolutely. Try to find places to drop that.
Drop that one, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, any other questions on how CSS works, how IDs, classes, and those general kind of mechanics of setting styles to things works?
So Jeff, why don't you just put a ID button blue background down below? Why do you choose class over ID?
Oh yeah, good question. So really the only choice you're making there is if it's like how many times you want to use it and how many elements you want to assign this to. So an ID can only be used once. There's only gonna be one element on your page that has that ID. But a class could be used any number of times. And that's really the only choice you're making there.
Gotcha.
So if you want several elements on your page to have a similar thing, you're gonna want to use a class. And again, that's why it's more frequently used, most honestly, is that IDs are available, but you don't use them as much.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, cool. So the last bit that we want to get through today is the most common way to do this. This is, again, all that we've done up to now when we wrote it inline and we wrote it here up in this style tag is fine. It's totally fine to do that. But typically what we do is we set these CSS files or set this CSS stuff in a separate file on its own, because as you get going, unless your project is exactly this size, you're going to have a really long style sheet, and that's going to be a real pain to have it all on one page. So you're going to want to put your CSS in a separate file, and you're going to want to have your HTML in a separate file. So you're dealing with these things separately. So all you have to look at on your HTML is where the tags are and what is tagged with what, and that's plenty to keep track of. And then you want to look at your CSS files and see like what the definitions of those things are and what their attributes are. And it's like definitely the best way to go. So we're going to refactor that code now, set this up to where it does the same stuff, but we're going to do it in an external file. Cool. So to do that, we are going to let's go back to the console. I'm going to do this in the console again because I like doing stuff in the console. But you could do this in your GUI, right? In the Python Anywhere graphical user interface instead of the console if you don't want to. But I'm going to do it here in the console. And I'm going to make a couple directories. I'm going to make two different directories. And I'll make a file inside of one of those directories, right? I'm going to do it all in one command. I'll link commands together. So this is, oh, I'm sorry, that's not how you do it. So we're going to do the mkdir make directory. And then we're going to do, I'm just going to give the absolute directories, even though I'm in the my site directory. I want to make sure that I'm putting them in the right place. So I'm going to make a my site static. So this is a static folder that's going to be at the top level root of our project. And then inside, so make dir, this mkdir can take two different directories to make. So inside of that static directory, so inside of my site /static, I'm going to yet another directory make called styles. And this is where our styles will live. Get this thing out the way. I'm going to chain two commands together by using ampersands. So and I'm going to create in that last directory, the my site, and this is all in the day 7 documentation. This full command is in there. So if you want to copy and paste it, email it out before class. If you want to follow along, I definitely encourage you to. So I'm doing ampersand, double ampersand, touch, and then the directory file name that I want to make. So I do my site static styles / main styles.css. All right, so I'm going to make this command is making one directory here. That's a static directory at the top level. And then it will then make a second directory inside of that static directory called styles. After it's done executing that, I will use touch to make a file called main styles.css inside of that recently created my site static styles directory. Cool. All right, so now we did that. Again, that's just, I like making things fast that way. That's the way to go. I encourage everyone else to do it too. Well, we can go ahead and make the edit in here. I'm gonna go back to my site. Now we see the static directory is here next to our static main. And inside of that, we should have styles. Inside that, we should have our main CSS. So again, you could have made these directories here in the GUI if you wanted to, just my site static styles, main.css. And once we get here, there should be nothing in there. All we're going to do is we're going to copy out, we're going to cut and paste our, of course, I closed the page that I wanted here. The HTML or the CSS that we just wrote in our HTML page. So let's go back to our base.html and pull out this CSS right out of the style tag. So everything that's inside the style tag that is not the style tag itself, I'm just going to Control X to cut that stuff out. And over in my main styles, I'm just going to paste that in there. It'll come out kind of jacked up. I'm going to fix this for readability, but this will not break things. Unlike Python, CSS, HTML, JavaScript, those sorts of things don't really care about your spacing and your indentation. It won't break stuff. This all gets compiled down to a single line when it gets read by the computer anyway, so it really doesn't care. This is more for human readability. But so now I've got my ID that's in here, and I've got the class that we defined before, the same definitions as we did before. Go ahead and save this. I'm not going to reload the server yet. I'm going to go, I have to save the changes here. I'm going to get rid of the style tags. We're not using it. There's nothing inside of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull this out entirely, delete it. So now there's no CSS on here. We still have our references the way we did before, but there's nothing in here that says CSS. What we also don't have is we don't have any way to connect those two files together, right? So there's nothing connecting these. If we go back to our page, if I reload it now, there won't be any of the styles available to us. Let's try that real quick. I want to show you that that's the case because now I've moved to a different file and different directory. And if we go over here, our styles disappear. So we don't have those background colors anymore on our buttons. They're gone. So what we have to do is we have to tell this page, we have to connect it somehow. You have to say that it needs to be looking for this style sheet. So we're going to do that in our head element. This is, again, very common way to do this. We're going to do this with a lot of things moving forward. We're going to use what's called a link tag, L-I-N-K. This is not to be confused with your A tags that do hyper links with the hrefs. This is going to link two things together before the page loads, right? So the page is going to load with all this stuff, and anything you put in your head tag, you want it to load first. You want it to grab that stuff first and put it in there. So we're going to put in our style sheets in here. We're going to do this again with JavaScript next week with scripts, or not next week, on Thursday next time. So we have to tell the HTML how these sheets are related to, or how this link is related to this page so that it knows what it's supposed to do with it. So we say rel, this is like for relation, and we'll tell it that it's a style sheet, just one word, style sheet in quotation marks. We're going to tell it what type of style sheet it is. So it's going to be text slash CSS. And then just like we did with the A tag, we're going to give it in href. So it's very similar. We're going to use Django in here again because we're using Django as our backend framework that's connecting all these things. If you use different frameworks, if you do this directly in just vanilla HTML and stuff like that, you obviously wouldn't use the Django things, but we're going to use Django here. So Django tags with the curly bracket, percentage sign, and I'm going to close these off before I get going so I don't forget the last one. So in between our Django template tags, we're going to use another word called static. It's a reserved word. So not like URL, this one that was going to our URLs. This is statics because we are referencing, again, static files. Remember, we created our main.styles in our static directory. So we're going to tell it where that directory is. Now, if you recall, when we set our, when it was last week, when we set our settings for where our static directories are and we set all that stuff up, that's what this is referencing. So this is referencing the static URL, and it is going to say, all right, cool. So our static directory is going to have subdirectories and paths inside of it. So I have to start inside of the static thing. So if you remember the path here is static, then styles, then main. So we have to do this piece, the styles / main / CSS. That's the piece that we have to reference because this static is going to grab the rest of it. It's going to get the root and all the other parts that we need. So we just need to put in styles / main - CSS. Oh, sorry, main styles .css. So main - styles.css. So the same, whatever you name this, if you name this something else, you want to put it in your href tag. Put in the href attribute of your link tag. Cool. All right. So once we have this, we have static styles.main reference in here. Again, as a Python type string with the single quotation marks inside the HTML, the double quotation marks. I'm going to close off our link tag with our greater than symbol. And you'll notice it doesn't have a closing tag with that backslash and link. Some of them don't. This is one that doesn't. So don't worry about it. That's okay. It is fully contained as it is, but don't forget that last little bracket thing. Now, the other thing we got to do here is this reserved word static is all fine and great, but we got to tell Django to load that into the page kind of before we get going too deep into this. So right underneath our doctype HTML call right up here towards the top of the page, so directly underneath it, we're going to use Django again. We're going to open up a Django tag. And this is just on its own line, so it's not inside HTML. It's not inside anything else. It's not inside quotation marks, just curly bracket, percentage sign. I'm going to close it off again so I don't forget. Percentage sign, curly bracket. So inside our Django tag, we're going to tell it to load, just the word load, and then static. And what that's going to do is it's going to load this tag first. So the first line is it's going to do that control structure we talked about, sequentially reading the first line, then reading the second line. When it gets here, Django is going to say, all right, cool. I'm going to go load the static stuff out of this directory that you've defined in your settings file as a static URL. And then when it gets down here, it's going to say, cool, I'm going to look for a CSS sheet at this directory. And that should give us the connection to make these calls actually work. So I'm going to save this. And before I reload it and start doing things, one last thing we got to do is the same thing we did last time. We have to run collect static in our console. So I'm going to go back to our bash console. All right, I'm going to clear this up a little bit. Refresh your memory. We're in our top site, our top level directory, the same place that our manage.py file is. And the way that we're going to run collect static is the Python 3 manage.py, similar to what we did since week 1 on running anything directly like this, manage.py, and then collect static, all one word. Enter on this. It should say, oh, we're going to do some stuff. It's going to copy all the files. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to go to all the files in our structure that are labeled static. And if you recall, right now, we only have the one. Let's have our look again. In our top level My Site directory, we have this static directory right here, right? We're going to make another one in to do later, but right now we have static. So what it's going to do is it's going to go into this directory and it's going to copy all subdirectories and all parts and pieces that are in there, and it's going to copy it to this static.main. And that's what it's telling us it's doing. It's saying, hey, this is going to overwrite everything you've already got in static.main. Is that really what you want to do? So it's going to do this every time there's something in your main static folder. So if you have, so the first time you do this, it won't ask you this, but every time you do afterwards, it'll ask you this. So you got to say, yes, I do want to do that. And then it'll tell you how many files it copied over. So it won't recopy the, you remember we did this the first time, it copied 120 something files from the admin section. It won't recopy all that stuff. It'll just get the new ones. It'll automatically get the new ones. So this should be the one main.css file that we created should now be copied in here. So if we go into our main static, we should see styles, which we do. And inside of styles, we should see our main.css. And when we open this up, it should be exactly the same stuff that we had in our other one. And again, you look at the path of this. This is my site, static main, styles, main.css. This one is my site, static, styles, main.css, right? So when I ran collect static, it copied this file to here. They look the same. But now when I run this and I reload the source code, which I'm doing now, reloading the source code on the server side. And when I refresh the browser, what Django is going to do is it's going to go here to the static main styles, and it's going to get this file. It's not going to get this file. It's going to get this file, and it's going to serve that up here, or should. And there we go. So now we see we have back our blue and green labels that we had before we wrote this in line, but now we're grabbing it from our static main styles, main styles.css.
So that's how to do it. That's what it does. But the question is why don't we just use the files that we have and run the page?
Like, what do you mean? Why don't we
Why are
run
we
it?
doing it? Why are we making twice as much disk space used for this whole website
Right.
when, I mean, why duplicate all your files? I mean,
Yeah, it's,
isn't the whole thing just to have less code?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Part of it is because Django is not amazing in handling static files. This is quite literally part of the reason that it does what it does the way that it does it, is Django's not the best at static file handling. So kind of an issue. Really, though, it's more efficient, from what I understand, for it to serve from a single directory when it's live, right? So this single unified static main directory is the project level directory. So let's go back into our console real quick. I'm going to show you this again. So what we're going to do to answer your question, hopefully, make this a little smaller so I can get the whole tree in here again. And I'm just hitting up to get to the tree. All right. So what your question is a very valid question. So at this top level, we've got our static styles main, and then redundantly, we have styles main again in a different static directory, right? So what happens on bigger projects is that each application, like To-Do, that we haven't done a lot with yet, except serve our basic stuff, is going to have its own set of static files that are in here. And each application will have its own subdirectory of static files that are inside of it. And those static files could be JavaScript, they could be Python scripts, they could be any number of backend scripts. It doesn't have to be the ones that we're using yet or here. It could be front end stuff. And all those things will, as the projects grow, you're going to put those in their own places. Now, again, for efficiency, instead of having to serve from all those and like having the browser have to traverse all those structures to grab all their files when it loads the page, that would slow down loading the page. So the idea is before you make the page live, you collect all of your static files from the entire project into one place so that when someone visits your site, it only has to go to one place to get all the files that it needs. And it's just a little bit faster. So does that answer your question? It is a little bit redundant, especially the size of project that we are now. But the idea with doing it this way is that as it grows, it's going to make it a lot faster and a lot easier, honestly, to maintain and understand what's happening.
But then when you're making changes to the actual code, because you're not supposed to go into static main, right?
No,
You're supposed to let it manage static main, and I do all the other files outside it and forget static main exists.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
if you don't do your collect, you're not going to see your change. So it's just this extra grind of steps that you got to do. And
Just an extra
you
step.
swap
Yeah.
something out to try it, and then you got to do your static collect. And
Yep. And you will often forget to do that step when you're doing this kind of stuff. You're
Yeah.
like making changes and doing these things, and you're like, why am I not, I'm not doing the button's not going the right, and you're just forgetting to collect the static. So I get you. I'm not going to try to stand up for Django in this regard and say that it's the best and it's the most efficient. It's not. There are probably slicker versions of things out there that do that. This is how Django does it. It's not, it does actually, I don't know, it's not as obnoxious as it may appear. I put it that way. It's not as bad. It's not that big a deal, but you will forget sometimes to collect static. It's just another step that you got to run through. And it usually doesn't take all that long to do. That's a totally valid question though. Any other questions? Why we would do it, how we would do it.
I have one. So I followed along and I got an error that said invalid block tag on line 6, the static. Did you forget to register or load this tag?
Ah, okay. So is your link tag on line 6?
Yes.
All right. So did you put this load static part up here?
Um,
Sounds like you may have forgotten that.
I know I didn't. I forgot that.
That's probably what so that error is what you will get if you leave out this tag and you don't tell Django to load it ahead of time. It'll get down here and be like, I don't know what this is.
Okay. So then would I have to do the collect static again?
You shouldn't. No, it's the collect static is just going to copy over any new static files that you made over there. So if you haven't done any changes to the CSS file, then you shouldn't have to collect static again.
Okay, got
Good
it.
question. Yeah, any changes to the HTML does not require collect static.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So you should just be able to save and reload and then it should work. Cool. Any other questions?
You know, I'm still getting that thing when I'm loading a tree,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
The first couple of lines will be exactly what you've got.
Mhm.
And then it dumps everything that Python owns after that. And I cannot figure out what the problem is.
That could be that you have, I mean, do you have like your virtual environment here somewhere? Is it getting VM stuff? You could try adding that to the ignore thing and see if
You mean to add like PyCache, CSA, and then VENV to that list?
yeah, try that because you could have your VM in the wrong place. But yeah, if you're doing those, like as you can see, I ran that with these filters in the project directory.
Yeah, mine looks like, see, mine looks exactly like yours.
That's funny.
Oh,
Yeah, if you want, man, we can. I can hop on with you sometime. We could talk about that because this. I like Tree. It's a fun little sexy thing, but it's not required. So if you can't get that working, you can just look in your file directory over here, get the same thing. But I can definitely kind of like see what the issue is offline.
it's kind of, yeah, sure, we can do that.
Cool. Anybody else questions about what we covered today or anything? I guess in the course up to now, we got a couple of minutes. So
Does the home button still have a blue background?
well, let's go see.
I was looking at the code and I didn't see anything telling it to be blue.
Interesting.
Right there, line 12.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I did take the ID off, didn't I?
So why is it still blue?
Let's see. Maybe I didn't reload my server side code once I made that change. I just saved it. Let's see. Maybe this will do it. Yep, that did it. So it was just a matter of not reloading the code to the server, which again, another important step is that I could come here and refresh the browser all day long, but if the server code hasn't been updated, it's just going to keep serving me back that old code that's on the server. So
Cool.
good catch. Good question. Any other questions? All right, cool. So we are right at time. We can wrap up there. And Thursday, we're going to continue from here, but we're going to talk about front end frameworks. We're going to use a fairly old front end framework, still relevant, still useful. It's called Bootstrap, invented by Twitter. It's free, easy to use. There are way sexier, way more modern things out there that I encourage you to learn, things like Vue or React or any of those sorts of things. We'll talk specifically about what those are, why you might want to use them, and then show you how to plug them in. The mechanics of plugging them in are largely the same depending, which one you want to use. But we'll get into all that stuff on Thursday. So if nothing else, I will stop the recording and everyone is free to go. We'll see you Thursday.
Okay, thank you. See you next
Good
time.
stuff. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steph.
Thanks, Jeff.